Hello, Captain Josh here, and thanks for watching. It is well known that humpback whale pectoral fins, which are the large fins on their sides that look like wings, aid the whale in acceleration maneuverability while it's feeding. But it's been theorized that they may also use their fins to herd prey. Recently, a study done at Hidden Falls Hatchery was the first to document this behavior, where they found whales that combined pectoral herding with bubble nets to contain and trap salmon fry being released from the hatchery. Although the concept that humpback whales use their pectorals to manipulate prey and help them catch it is not new, actual footage of this behavior is almost unheard of, until we happen to put a drone over a strangely acting whale out near Pleasant Island. This whale was known by us and the other whale watching captains as the Veggie Whale, because it always hung around the thick kelp beds off of Pleasant Island Reef. At first, we didn't consider it a very interesting whale for our whale watchers, as it never dove deep enough to show its tail, and it was a very unpredictable whale with its spouts. But for almost a month, it lived and fed in an area that was less than a couple of square miles, which is an incredibly tiny area for these huge creatures. This did make it a very reliable whale for us, though, to at least see something if we weren't able to find any other whales. Now, I did try using the drone a few times to see what this whale was doing, but the silt from Glacier Bay usually made the water so murky we couldn't see much. But what I could see intrigued me. I thought at first it might just be playing in the kelp or scratching itself on the reef, but as day after day passed and the whale was always there, it became obvious that it must be feeding on something, as it was just spending way too much time at the kelp bed for that to be all playtime. Finally, a day came that the weather and currents all lined up just right to bring in deep, clear water over the reef, and we finally could see everything that this whale was doing. What we are seeing here is the veggie whale opening his mouth and shoving it into the kelp forest, and then it appears that he waves his fins around to stir up and move the prey around. Because the whale is so much bigger than whatever it is that it's feeding on, the prey probably doesn't even know that the whale is the danger, so they go and swim and hide in the big cave that's conveniently located right next to them, not realizing that that is the whale's mouth, whereupon the whale then closes his mouth and consumes them. Now, the study at Hidden Falls Hatchery in 2015 that documented similar behavior described three different techniques that the humpbacks use to catch prey by pectoral herding, but all of those involved either bubble nets or a final lunge of some sort to finally engulf the prey. This whale, on the other hand, is pretty clearly using either an extremely subdued lunge or none at all. The prey in this case is putting itself into the whale's mouth, not the other way around. As far as my research indicates, this is the first time this exact technique has ever been observed, let alone documented. Now, theoretically, a specialized feeding technique may indicate a different kind of prey than humpback whales typically feed on. I'm still not sure what exactly that might be, but I think we can use a little deductive reasoning to make an educated guess. For something to be the prey item targeted by this whale, certain requirements are needed. One, there has to be enough of it to feed this whale. Now, these whales can eat over 3,000 pounds of food a day, and this isn't a skinny whale. Whatever it's eating, there has to be enough of it here to feed, or at least supplement the feeding of a very large whale almost every day for over a month. We're talking between 30 and 90,000 pounds of food consumed by this one whale off of this one spot this summer, and it's also safe to assume the whale didn't eat all of the prey that was there, because if it had, there would be a period where it was getting less and less food as the prey became less abundant, and it would have quit and moved on to other food as soon as it wasn't worth the time and trouble. At the same time, in these videos, we see 7 different feeding attempts, and in none of them was any prey visible. Now, I've seen adult herring with a drone before, so I know that whatever this whale is feeding on, it probably is quite a bit smaller than those. So it has to be both abundant and tiny. Lastly, it probably is something that lives near cover. Herring and krill and most salmon fry live in open water, ranging from depths of over 1,000 feet all the way to the surface. But they typically avoid things like rock piles and kelp beds, as those are places where predatory fish like rockfish, lingcod, sculpins, and more like to hide. The only reason why the whale would push into the kelp like this and again, though, is because there's more food there than there is in the open water. It also stirs up the water a lot, which looks to me like it's getting things up off the kelp and rocks and out moving into the water. But then there was one more factor that I realized I hadn't thought about: water current. If you look closely, you'll see that the water is really moving. Strong tidal currents sweep back and forth across this reef all day, every day, and a lot of juvenile fish and crustaceans just can't keep up in the currents. So maybe they tuck in behind the kelp or in the back behind the rocks to get out of the main flow. That could provide a concentration of prey that might interest a whale. So what does that mean this whale is feeding on? I personally think that this whale is feeding off of a variety of prey, including tiny fish like baby cod, juvenile herring, and salmon, and probably shrimp, isopods, and other invertebrates living on the coast itself. Both the cod and the salmon are seasonal, which would explain why the whale moved on after a while, but there's a lot we just don't know. I guess a dive trip to Pleasant Island Reef is in order next summer to get in and try and see what exactly this food could be. If there's enough to feed the whale, there should be enough for me to see. It does bring up some other questions and possibilities, though. If humpbacks will feed off of the kelp bed like this near the surface, do they also use a similar technique near the ocean floor and other places? In places where we can't see them, perhaps, due to the depth of the water? Now, these potential areas of research and discovery are very interesting to me. One of the other interesting questions that comes to my mind is, why does this whale do this? This is not a common behavior as far as we know, though maybe we'll see more of this in the future as we continue our tours. But assuming that this isn't common, this whale probably figured out how to do this on its own, instead of being taught by its mother, which means that it's a relatively new behavior. So why would a whale change behavior? Well, historically, there used to be a lot more humpback whales, and they probably fed on anything and everything they could find, just like this one is, because a high population would have made things very competitive for them. Then intensive whaling happened during the 20th century that removed something like 90% of the humpbacks. It wasn't until after the whaling happened that research into their behaviors was really done, and by then, most of the whales were gone. There were probably all sorts of behaviors that these whales used to use, but the whales that used them were either killed, or the behavior wasn't necessary anymore because of the changes in the ecosystem, such as an increased abundance of herring relative to the whales. Herring are probably the best food for humpbacks. They're abundant, highly nutritious, and form big schools that make it possible for the whales to eat a lot of them. So when there was only a few humpbacks left after the whaling, they probably mostly focused on feeding on the herring. And this theory is borne out by what the earliest researchers watching them saw. If the whales were only eating herring, though, then they would forget about other techniques, and they wouldn't teach them to their calves, and thus those behaviors would be lost. But now with increasing numbers of humpbacks and dwindling herring stocks, the whales are needing to get more competitive again. And just maybe, the whales are reinventing techniques to target other food sources. It's possible that in 10 years, we'll be seeing completely new whale feeding activities. Another final observation that we made was a different whale using a similar technique in the same area. Unlike the veggie whale, he's not feeding in the kelp bed, and definitely appears to be a thinner whale, but it's clear that he's using a similar method. Maybe he's learning from the veggie whale? But time will tell. If we start to see more and more whales using this technique, we'll have to document which whales do it and see if it becomes a more common behavior. I'm pretty good at knowing what's going on in most of my videos, but with new discoveries like this, I'd love it if some real researchers would chime in. If you have any expertise or knowledge, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Anyways, thanks again for watching. I'm Captain Josh, and I hope you enjoyed this video.